What would you do if a tow truck showed up at midnight, not to help you, but to steal your car because your HOA ordered it? This really happened, and the ending will shock you. The neighborhood was usually quiet at night, the kind of silence where even the rustling of tree leaves felt louder than it should. Families slept peacefully behind locked doors, children dreamed without worry, and the moon cast a silver glow over the rows of neatly trimmed lawns. But on this particular night, something sinister was brewing, something that would shake the very trust of every homeowner in the community. It started with the low, rumbling growl of engines echoing through the darkness. At first, it was faint, almost easy to mistake for a distant truck passing down the main road. But within minutes, the sound grew louder, multiplied, and carried a weight of menace. 3 large tow trucks rolled slowly into the cul-de-sac, their headlights dimmed as if they didn't want to wake the sleeping families. The vehicles looked like shadows with steel claws, creeping into a place they didn't belong. Inside one of the homes, Ethan Carter stirred awake. He was a veteran, a father of 2, and a man who valued honesty above all else. His instincts were sharp, and something about that noise sent a chill through his body. Pulling back his curtain, he saw them, the massive tow trucks idling like predators. His eyes narrowed as he watched uniformed men step out, clipboards in hand, black uniforms glinting faintly under the streetlights. They weren't city workers. They weren't police. They were contractors hired by the HOA. Ethan couldn't believe what he was seeing. The men moved quickly, attaching hooks and chains to the vehicles parked along the street, family cars, work trucks, even an old minivan that belonged to a single mother down the block. No warnings, no notices. Just cold, silent efficiency. He rushed outside in his slippers, his voice breaking the silence of the night. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" One of the men, a tall figure with a shaved head, turned and sneered. "HOA orders. These cars are in violation." "In violation of what?" Ethan snapped, his anger boiling. "It's midnight. You can't just come in here and steal people's cars." The man shrugged. "Talk to your board. We're just doing our job." With that, he signaled his crew, and the first truck lifted a silver sedan into the air, its alarm blaring into the night. The sound pierced through the neighborhood, waking families one by one. Lights flicked on. Doors opened. Neighbors stumbled out, confused and frightened, only to find their vehicles being taken. Mothers screamed. Fathers argued. Children clung to their parents, terrified by the chaos. "This is theft," shouted a neighbor. "You can't take our cars without warning." But the HOA officers ignored them, holding up papers like shields. Unpaid fees. Parking violations. You people signed the agreement when you moved in. The words were like daggers. Some residents remembered missing a payment or receiving a vague letter about parking compliance. But nothing had prepared them for this. Tow trucks at midnight, ripping apart their sense of security. Ethan stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You're not taking my car," he growled. His pickup truck wasn't just a vehicle, it was his livelihood, the way he provided for his family. The tall officer smirked. "Then pay up or step aside." Ethan's heart raced. He could feel his neighbors' eyes on him, their fear and desperation hanging heavy in the air. And in that moment, he realized something. This wasn't just about cars. This was about power. The HOA was sending a message, obey or be crushed. And Ethan wasn't about to let that happen. As he stood his ground, another thought hit him. If he fought alone, he would lose. But if the neighborhood stood together, they could resist. He looked around at the faces of his neighbors, scared, tired, angry, and he knew this night was just the beginning of a battle none of them had asked for, but all of them would be forced to fight. The engines roared louder as the tow trucks prepared to drag away another vehicle. The neighborhood, once peaceful, had turned into a battlefield. And in the shadows of that night, Ethan made a silent vow. They will not take what we have built. Not without a fight. The war between the homeowners and the HOA had just begun. The alarms echoed through the neighborhood like cries for help. One by one, doors slammed open and families spilled out onto their porches, their confusion turning to outrage. Mothers clutched their robes tight against the cold night air while fathers argued with the uniformed enforcers. Children peeked from behind their parents' legs, eyes wide at the sight of steel chains dragging away the cars they'd ridden in only hours earlier. Ethan stood in the middle of the street, bare feet on the pavement, refusing to move. His pickup truck was already hooked, the tow truck's engine grumbling as if impatient for permission to snatch away the heart of his family's survival. The driver leaned out of his window and shouted, "Step back, or you'll be arrested for interference." The threat should have made him retreat, but instead Ethan took another step forward. His voice carried strong across the cul-de-sac. "This isn't just about me. This is about all of us. They think we're too scared to stop them. They think we'll just roll over while they take whatever they want." His neighbors gathered closer, their fear shifting into something new, anger. Mr. and Mrs. Alvarez, who had lived there for 20 years, stood shoulder to shoulder beside Ethan. A single mother named Rachel, whose old minivan had already been hauled off, wiped her tears and clenched her fists. The air was electric with the possibility that, just maybe, if they all resisted together, the trucks would have to back down. The HOA enforcer waved his clipboard like a weapon. "All vehicles in violation will be removed. If you refuse to comply, you'll face fines and legal action." "Fines?" Rachel shouted. "I'm already working 2 jobs to keep up with the last ones. You can't take my car. It's how I get to work." The officer didn't flinch. To him, it was just another job, another order carried out in the name of community standards. Ethan raised his voice again, this time not just to fight back, but to inspire. "Listen, everyone, this isn't about rules anymore. It's about control. They tow our cars tonight, what's next? Our homes? Our freedom to live without fear? If we don't draw the line here, they'll never stop." The crowd murmured in agreement. Some shouted, "Yeah." Others stepped closer, creating a wall of bodies between the tow trucks and the vehicles that remained. The standoff was tense, headlights illuminating determined faces against the midnight air. And then Ethan did something he never imagined himself doing. He pulled out his phone, turned on the camera, and began recording. His voice was steady, but his hand trembled with urgency. "If you're watching this, understand one thing. The HOA thinks they can take our cars in the middle of the night, without notice, without reason. But we won't let them. This is our fight and we need to share it, so the world knows what's happening here." He looked straight into the camera lens. "If you believe in standing up for what's right, if you believe people should not be bullied in their own neighborhoods, then stand with us. Subscribe, share this, tell everyone, because tonight, it's our cars. Tomorrow it could be yours." The neighbors, hearing his words, seemed to grow taller, stronger. They weren't just homeowners anymore. They were a community united by injustice. The lead tow truck revved its engine again, chains rattling against steel. The driver muttered something into his radio, frustrated by the sudden resistance. "We've got a situation," he said. "The whole neighborhood's out here." For the first time that night, Ethan noticed the hesitation in the men's eyes. They hadn't expected resistance. They were used to silence, to families hiding behind curtains while their property disappeared into the night. But this time, the people stood their ground. "Unhook the truck," Ethan demanded, his voice like stone. The enforcer stared at him, clipboard trembling slightly in his hand. "We'll be back. This isn't over." The crowd erupted in protest. Some jeered, some shouted, but not one of them moved until the trucks finally pulled away, their engines fading into the night. The cul-de-sac fell into silence once again, broken only by the sound of neighbors exhaling in relief. Ethan knew the battle was far from over. The HOA would return, angrier and more determined. But tonight, they had won something greater than any single car: unity. For the first time in years, the community had stood as one. Rachel wiped her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Ethan. If you hadn't stepped in..." He shook his head. "It wasn't just me. It was all of us. And we're going to need each other for what's coming next." The moon hung low, casting silver light over the street as if marking the moment. A new fight had begun, one not of individuals, but of neighbors bound together by courage. And somewhere in the dark, the HOA was already planning their next move. The night ended in uneasy silence, but peace never truly returned. By morning, The cul-de-sac buzzed with anxious conversations. Neighbors huddled on driveways, retelling the events in hushed, urgent voices. Word spread quickly: tow trucks, midnight raids, and a standoff that had sent the HOA running. For the first time in years, the community felt a spark of pride. They had stood together. They had said no. But deep down, everyone knew this wasn't the end. The HOA had been embarrassed, and powerful people rarely forgive humiliation. Ethan spent the morning walking the neighborhood. Everywhere he went, people thanked him, shaking his hand, offering coffee, asking what the next step should be. But behind the gratitude, he saw the fear in their eyes. How long before the HOA struck back? What form would their revenge take? The answer came faster than anyone expected. By the afternoon, official-looking letters appeared taped to nearly every front door. The envelopes bore the HOA's logo in bold, unforgiving black. Inside, the message was clear and merciless. Residents in violation of Association Code 14.2 are hereby fined $500 per incident. Failure to comply will result in legal action, lien placement, or forfeiture of community privileges. Rachel found hers first. Standing on her porch, she tore the paper in half, tears brimming in her eyes. $500? She gasped. For what? For standing outside and protecting my van. The Alvarezes shook their heads in disbelief, holding up their own letter. We've lived here 20 years, never missed a payment. And now this? They can't do this. But they could. And they had. Ethan read his notice in silence. His hands tightened around the paper until it crumpled. It wasn't just a fine, it was a message: we're still in control. You may have stopped the tow trucks, but we own the rules. That night, another letter arrived in his mailbox, this one delivered by certified mail. It was personal, addressed to him directly. Mr. Carter, your interference with association business on the evening of August 12th constitutes harassment, obstruction, and violation of community policy. Further actions of this nature will result in immediate legal escalation. It was signed by the HOA president herself, Margaret Langston. A woman known for her rigid smile, her immaculate front lawn, and her iron grip on the board. People whispered about her like she was untouchable, half queen, half executioner. And now she had set her sights on Ethan. When he read it aloud to the neighbors, the crowd fell silent. Some backed away, whispering to their spouses. Others muttered about selling their homes, about moving before things got worse. That's what they want, Ethan said firmly. They want us scared. They want us divided. But if we give in now, we'll be paying fines for the rest of our lives. We can't just roll over. But what can we do? Rachel asked. They have lawyers, money, power. We're just regular people. Ethan looked at her, then at the circle of tired, angry faces around him. That's exactly why we'll win. Because they're fighting for control. We're fighting for our homes, our families, our lives. That makes us stronger. The words lit something inside the group, but even as they nodded, Ethan knew it wouldn't be easy. That weekend, the HOA made their next move. Security cameras were installed at the entrances of the neighborhood. Patrol cars marked community enforcement drove slowly through the streets at night. And new signs appeared, nailed into the ground like warnings from a conqueror. All violations subject to immediate towing. 24-hour enforcement. The message was clear. The HOA had declared war. And though the residents were shaken, Ethan felt something shift. He had seen their courage once, in the dead of night when the tow trucks had rolled in. He knew that fire wasn't gone, it was only waiting to rise again. As he stood on his porch, letters still crumpled in his hand, he made a vow to himself and to his neighbors. They can fine us, they can threaten us, but they will not break us. Because when ordinary people stand together, even the strongest chains can be broken. And Ethan was ready to lead them into the storm. By Sunday evening, the neighborhood no longer felt like home. Patrol cars cruised the streets with predatory patience, their flashing lights reflecting off windows like silent warnings. Neighbors avoided standing on their lawns for too long, afraid of being accused of loitering. Parents hushed their children, worried that a stray soccer ball rolling into the street might somehow trigger another violation. The HOA had done what it always did, tightened its grip, suffocating the very people it claimed to protect. But underneath the fear, a quiet determination was growing. And it started in Ethan Carter's living room. The furniture was pushed aside to make space. Folding chairs filled every corner. Neighbors packed shoulder to shoulder, voices overlapping in anger and exhaustion. Rachel sat in the front row, clutching her notebook like it was armor. The Alvarezes brought coffee, pouring steaming cups as if bracing everyone for a long night. Even Mr. Daniels, the reclusive man from the end of the street who rarely spoke to anyone, showed up with a stack of old HOA bylaws he'd kept hidden in his attic. Ethan stood at the front, a legal pad in his hand, but he didn't need notes. He had lived this battle. His voice carried a weight that silenced the room. We can't keep living like this. Last night it was fines, tomorrow it could be foreclosures. The HOA thinks we're weak because we don't have their money or lawyers. But we have something stronger, each other. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Rachel raised her hand. What if they come after us individually? I can't afford another fine. Ethan nodded. That's why we don't fight as individuals. We fight as a community. They can't punish all of us if we stand together. Mr. Daniels shuffled his stack of papers onto the coffee table. I've been keeping these for years. Copies of old meeting notes, financial records, amendments to the bylaws. Most folks don't know this, but the board isn't as powerful as they pretend to be. There are limits, legal ones. If we can prove they've overstepped, we have a case. The room leaned in. For the first time, hope flickered in tired eyes. Ethan smiled faintly. Then that's where we start. We gather evidence. We record everything, tow trucks, patrols, fines. We keep copies of every notice, every threat. They want to play by the book? Then we'll beat them with their own rules. Rachel tapped her pen against her notebook. We could start a petition. If enough homeowners sign, we can force a special election. Maybe even remove the board members who are behind this. The room buzzed with energy. Ideas spilled out, contacting local news stations, hiring a lawyer as a group, reaching out to other neighborhoods that had fought back. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was a plan. But as the energy rose, so did the fear. Mrs. Alvarez whispered, "What if they retaliate again? Margaret won't just sit back. She'll crush us." Ethan's jaw tightened. Then we don't give her the chance. We go public before she can bury us. They hide in the shadows because people are too afraid to speak. But if the world sees what they're doing, the board loses their power. Silence fell. Everyone knew he was right. The question was, who would take the first step into the spotlight? Ethan looked around the room. At Rachel, who had worked herself to the bone to support her kids. At the Alvarezes, who had given decades of their lives to this community. At Daniels, who had spent years quietly gathering secrets. And then he realized, it had to be him. "I'll do it," he said firmly. "I'll be the one to speak out. I'll talk to the news, the papers, whoever will listen. They want to silence us, but they'll have to silence me first." Rachel's eyes widened. "Ethan, they'll come after you even harder." "Let them," he replied. "I've fought worse battles than Margaret Langston. And I don't scare easy." The room erupted in applause, not wild, not careless, but steady and determined. The sound of people who, for the first time, believed they could win. As the meeting ended, neighbors left Ethan's house with straighter backs and firmer steps. The fear was still there, but so was something stronger, courage. From her window across the street, Margaret Langston watched the last of the families return to their homes. She had seen the gathering. She knew what was happening. And as she sipped her wine, her lips curled into a smile that carried no warmth. "Let them play hero," she whispered to herself. "They have no idea what's coming." The HOA war had moved into its next phase. And both sides were preparing for battle. The following week began with an uneasy calm. Patrol cars still circled like vultures, and the new cameras watched every driveway like unblinking eyes. But the neighbors carried themselves differently now. They waved to one another. They shared quiet smiles. They weren't just frightened homeowners anymore. They were allies. Ethan felt it too. For the first time, he believed they had a chance to win. Meetings were being held twice a week, signatures were piling up on the petition, and rumors swirled that a local journalist might be interested in their story. The HOA's grip was tightening, but so was the neighborhood's resolve. Then came Friday morning. Ethan opened his front door and froze. His pickup truck was gone. At first, he thought maybe Rachel had borrowed it. She often asked for help with rides. But when he called her, she answered groggily from her couch. No one had touched it. Heart pounding, Ethan rushed into the street. It wasn't just his truck. For other vehicles were gone, vanished overnight. No tow trucks had been heard, no alarms had blared. It was as if the vehicles had been swallowed by the darkness. A small white paper fluttered on his porch. Ethan bent to pick it up. The words sent ice through his veins. Vehicles seized. Further resistance will result in permanent removal of privileges. HOA Board of Directors. No signatures, no official seals. Just a threat written as fact. By noon, chaos had spread. Neighbors screamed in their driveways, clutching the same notes. Rachel collapsed on her porch, sobbing that her van had been taken again. Mr. Alvarez raged, his fists shaking in the air as his wife tried to hold him back. The neighborhood Ethan had spent weeks trying to unite was cracking apart. "This is hopeless," someone shouted. "They'll just keep taking everything." "I can't lose my house too," another cried. "I'm moving. I don't care what it costs." The fear that Ethan had worked so hard to push back was flooding in again, drowning hope under a tide of despair. He tried to rally them, his voice hoarse from shouting. "Listen to me. They're doing this because they're scared of us. Because we're winning. If we give up now, they win forever." But even as he spoke, he could feel the weight of the missing vehicles crushing their spirit. What good were speeches when people couldn't get to work? When families couldn't drive their kids to school? That night, Ethan sat alone on his porch, staring at the empty space where his truck had once stood. His chest felt heavy, like he'd failed everyone. He thought of calling the police, but what would he say? That the HOA had stolen his car? The law rarely sided with homeowners in battles like this. The HOA was too careful, too powerful. Then, as he wrestled with his despair, headlights flickered down the street. For a moment his heart leapt, thinking maybe one of the cars had been returned. But instead, a sleek black SUV rolled to a stop in front of his house. The window lowered, and Margaret Langston's face appeared, illuminated by the dashboard glow. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. She just stared at him with eyes cold as glass. "You should have stayed out of this, Mr. Carter," she said smoothly. "I warned you. This community is not a democracy. It is order, and I am the one who keeps it. You want to play leader? Then watch as I take everything from you, piece by piece." Ethan stood, fists clenched, but she only rolled up her window and drove away, her SUV vanishing into the night like a specter. The message was clear. This wasn't just about bylaws or parking violations anymore. This was personal. Margaret wanted to break him, to destroy the rebellion by shattering its leader. And for the first time since the fight began, Ethan felt real fear, not for himself, but for the people who had trusted him. But as he looked at the darkened houses of his neighbors, he knew surrender wasn't an option. Margaret might have taken their cars, but she hadn't yet taken their will. And if she wanted a war, then a war she would get. The rebellion wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The neighborhood felt hollow in the days after the disappearances. Empty driveways were scars of humiliation, reminders of the HOA's iron grip. Families whispered about selling their homes, moving far away from Margaret Langston's reach. But Ethan refused to let her win. He couldn't. One evening, he gathered everyone once more in his living room. His voice was rough, his body tired, but his determination burned hotter than ever. "They think they broke us," he said, looking into the weary eyes of his neighbors. "But the truth is, this is exactly what tyrants do. They strike hardest when they're afraid. And Margaret Langston is afraid of us." Mr. Daniels laid a thick folder on the table. "She should be. I've been digging. The HOA's been mismanaging funds for years. Unauthorized fees. Illegal towing contracts. I have proof." The room stirred. Rachel leaned forward, eyes wide. "If we take this public, if the news sees this, they can't bury it." Ethan nodded. Exactly. Tomorrow morning, we're not just homeowners. We're witnesses. We're survivors. And we're going to tell the world what's been happening here. The next day, the rebellion went public. Local reporters swarmed the cul-de-sac, cameras rolling as residents held up notices, bills, and photos of their missing cars. Rachel spoke tearfully about losing her van twice. The Alvarezes told stories of decades of loyalty destroyed by greed. And Ethan stood at the center, his voice steady, his words clear. This is not about fines. This is not about cars. This is about freedom. Families should not be terrorized in their own homes. The HOA has forgotten they work for us, not the other way around. And today, we take our community back. The story exploded across social media. Videos of midnight tow trucks, shaky cell phone footage of the standoff, and interviews with frightened families went viral within hours. Across the city, other neighborhoods shared their own stories of abusive HOAs. What had begun as a single fight became a movement. By evening, the HOA board was cornered. Margaret Langston called an emergency meeting in the clubhouse. But instead of a quiet room of board members, she was met with a wall of cameras, reporters, and angry residents filling every seat. Ethan walked to the front. The crowd parted for him, neighbors standing tall at his side. Rachel, the Alvarezes, Daniels with his stack of papers. They weren't just residents anymore, they were warriors. Margaret's eyes narrowed. This meeting is for board members only, she snapped. Not anymore, Ethan replied calmly, placing Daniel's folder on the table. These documents show everything you've been hiding. Illegal contracts. Personal expenses charged to community funds. You've been using our money to keep your grip on power. The room erupted in gasps and shouts. Margaret's face paled, then flushed red. Lies. All of it. But Daniel stood up, his voice steady. These are your signatures. Your records. Deny it all you want, but the truth is here. The reporters swarmed her with questions. Neighbors shouted for her resignation. The board members, once loyal to Margaret, looked away, unwilling to be dragged down with her. For the first time, Margaret Langston looked small. Powerless. This isn't over, she hissed at Ethan, her voice trembling. Yes, Ethan said, his voice strong and resolute, it is. The vote was called on the spot. One by one, hands rose, residents demanding her removal, board members turning against her, even her closest allies unwilling to face the firestorm. Within minutes, Margaret Langston was stripped of her title, escorted out of the clubhouse not as a queen, but as a disgraced tyrant. The cheers that followed shook the walls. People hugged, cried, and clapped each other on the back. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt alive, not fearful, but free. Outside, under the warm glow of the streetlights, Ethan stood with his neighbors. The battle had been long, the wounds deep, but they had won. Rachel smiled through her tears. You did it, Ethan. He shook his head. We did it. All of us. This wasn't my fight alone. It was everyone's. And that's why we won. The community rebuilt itself in the weeks that followed. The missing vehicles were returned, fines were canceled, and a new board was elected, one made up of the very residents who had fought back. Instead of fear, the neighborhood was now built on trust, unity, and strength. Ethan often walked the street at night, listening to the laughter spilling from porches, the sound of kids playing late into the evening. Peace had returned, but it wasn't the fragile peace they'd once known. This was stronger, hardened. And every time he saw Margaret's abandoned house at the edge of the neighborhood, overgrown with weeds and emptiness, he was reminded of a truth that would stay with him forever. When ordinary people stand together, even the most powerful oppressor can fall. The war with the HOA was over. And the people had won.